At 74, Helen still starts her mornings with a barefoot walk through her garden, dew on her feet, sunlight on her face, breath steady and full. She journals in the quiet, calls her sister at noon, and hasn't missed her weekly watercolor class in 5 years. But it wasn't always like this. Helen's calm confidence was shaped by heartache, health scares, and lessons in listening to her body, especially her skin. Because sometimes, skin changes aren't just cosmetic, they're messages. And the first one might surprise you. One sudden skin discoloration, blue or purple tinge on toes or fingers. Helen never made a fuss over her health. She preferred gentle walks to gyms, chamomile tea to checkups. But one chilly morning, while slipping on her wool socks, something caught her eye. Her toes looked different, a muted blue, like the dusk before night. Not bruised, not injured, just oddly tinted. She wiggled them, rubbed them, even stood up to get the blood flowing. Nothing changed. It wasn't painful, just puzzling. Like many women her age, Helen had grown used to quiet changes. The skin thins, the veins become visible, hands and feet run colder. It was easy to write it off, but something about the stillness of that color stayed with her. And in hindsight, it wasn't just about her toes, it was her body gently tapping her on the shoulder. This story isn't just about Helen. It's about what our skin whispers long before anything feels wrong. Because in our 70s and beyond, those quiet shifts aren't always just part of aging. Sometimes they're signals. And the first one we're exploring is one you can see before you feel skin discoloration, especially a sudden blue or purple tinge in the extremities. Let's walk through Helen's journey and uncover why this subtle hue mattered far more than she expected. Before her garden walks and journaling, Helen lived differently. She retired from her job as a high school librarian at 67 and entered what she expected to be a peaceful, reflective chapter. But the shift brought more stillness than she was prepared for. Without daily structure, her world slowly contracted. Fewer errands, fewer outings, and fewer spontaneous moments. Her feet, once used to roaming library aisles, now spent hours tucked under a knitted throw. Helen had also dealt with grief quietly. She lost her partner to heart disease 6 years earlier. He was always the one who had health hiccups, medications, routines. Helen, by contrast, was steady, or so she thought. Her own body felt trustworthy, so when her feet started feeling unusually cold, she thought it was the weather. When they looked faintly purple in the evenings, she assumed it was the poor lighting. She had no history of circulation problems, no diabetes, no chronic illness. But that's the nature of subtle signs. They don't scream, they hum softly. What changed everything wasn't fear, it was curiosity. She began noticing that the color shift happened after sitting for long periods. She started paying closer attention, and that's when her story and her hearts began to unfold. Helen's first habit wasn't dramatic, it was observation. She began noting when the color shift appeared, typically late afternoon. After reading for hours or napping in her chair, she jotted it down in her journal. No panic, just patterns. She added a foot check to her evening routine, the same way she brushed her teeth. The second habit was movement. She set a soft kitchen timer to remind her to stand up every hour and walk to the mailbox, or simply stretch. She bought warm compression socks, not the tight ones, just enough to encourage circulation. These small rituals reawakened her awareness of her body's rhythms. Then came connection. Helen shared her notes with her doctor, not as a worried patient, but as a woman honoring her body's messages. Her doctor ran a few tests and discovered mild peripheral artery narrowing. It wasn't alarming, but it was meaningful. Helen didn't overhaul her life. She simply adjusted the lens. Her habits became softer, more intentional. Warm baths for circulation, a pillow under her legs during TV time, a short walk after dinner. Each choice felt like a conversation with her body, not a command, not fear, just kindness. Emotionally, Helen's journey shifted something deeper than blood flow. For the first time in years, she felt like her body and mind were in dialogue again. Instead of ignoring or dreading changes, She began greeting them with curiosity. What once would have felt like a decline, a discolored toe, an afternoon chill, became a cue for care. She no longer viewed aging as a slow fade-out, but as a quieter form of wisdom. The more she listened, the more vibrant she felt. Her confidence grew, not because the problem went away, but because she understood it. She felt informed, involved, and calm. And that emotional clarity rippled into everything. More energy during the day, more ease in conversations with her doctor, and more joy in her daily rituals. For anyone watching or reading who notices that same quiet change in their skin, whether on the toes, fingers, or elsewhere, Helen's story offers this. Don't brush it off. Don't panic either. Just listen. Your body is wise, and age gives it a deeper vocabulary. The next change she experienced came quietly too, but in a completely different way. It didn't look alarming. It didn't hurt. It itched. And that's where her story deepens. 2. Unexplained skin itching or irritation. As Helen began noticing the quiet language of her skin, the purpling of toes, the subtle signs of slowed circulation, her world didn't shrink in fear. It expanded with awareness. These weren't just symptoms to fear. They were signals of a body that still had much to say. The small rituals she built, daily checks, mindful movement, and warm leg wraps, created a sense of partnership between body and mind. It was no longer about watching for danger, but gently honoring what had always been there, waiting to be heard. But awareness doesn't stop at what we can see. Sometimes it arrives in sensation before it ever shows up in sight. And for Helen, the next message her body sent was different, less visible, more persistent. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't painful, it was an itch. Soft, insistent, and puzzling. A nightly whisper along her lower legs, always just under the surface, always returning. She had no new detergents, no rashes. Her lotion routine hadn't changed. And yet this unfamiliar itch refused to be ignored. It would take time, attention, and a shift in understanding for Helen to connect the dots between something as simple as itching and the health of her heart. Itching is one of those symptoms that rarely feels serious, until it is, for women over 65, especially those attuned to the natural dryness and sensitivity of aging skin. It's easy to assume it's just a result of the weather or dehydration, but persistent itching, especially in the lower limbs, can sometimes be linked to more than the surface. It can signal underlying vascular issues, subtle signs of cardiovascular stress, manifesting through skin behavior. Helen didn't know that at first. All she knew was that she kept reaching for her calf in the evenings, scratching gently through her cotton pajama pants, wondering why the irritation had started out of nowhere. This wasn't a one-off moment. It became a pattern, one she began to track. And as she did, something powerful happened. She began to shift from reacting to investigating. Instead of brushing it off, she tuned in. That shift in posture, from passive discomfort to curious engagement, marked the beginning of another level of emotional and physical transformation. The changes she embraced next weren't dramatic overhauls. They were soft, steady adjustments, and each one helped Helen reconnect to the deeper rhythms of her body and catch a signal that so many others overlook. Helen's itch started subtly. It wasn't inflamed or red. There was no visible irritation. It felt like something internal, like a restlessness in her skin. She'd pause while folding laundry, unconsciously scratching the side of her calf. At first she thought it was just winter dryness. She added extra moisturizer, switched to hypoallergenic soap. Nothing changed. The sensation would ease during the day, only to return in the evening, usually when she was still. That stillness, she would later realize, was part of the clue. Her body's circulation slowed when she rested, and with that came the signal, an itch. She brought it up casually during her next appointment, not as a complaint, but as an observation. Her doctor listened, asked a few more questions, and ordered a simple test for circulation. What followed was a deeper look at Helen's vascular health, which revealed early signs of reduced blood flow in her lower legs. no alarm bells, no emergency, just insight. What made the difference wasn't the symptom, it was Helen's shift in relationship with her body. She had learned, from experience, that her skin wasn't just a surface, it was a storyteller. And the story it was telling now wasn't about irritation, it was about circulation. Helen realized that the itching only started when she was inactive for long periods, especially in the evenings. This became her first insight. Discomfort can arise in stillness. Instead of dismissing it, she changed how she approached her evenings: gentle stretching before bed, light walks around the house after dinner, and seated leg exercises helped ease the sensation. These weren't exercises, they were forms of listening. She began moisturizing mindfully, not just as skincare, but as self-check. While applying lotion, she paid attention to texture, sensitivity, temperature. Her hands became the sensors. Over time, this ritual became not just soothing but informative. She noticed which areas itched more, and when. That mindfulness created an emotional calm alongside physical clarity. Helen started a body log, a small journal, where she noted the time, location, and duration of the itch. Within a week, patterns emerged. The consistency helped her feel in control. It also gave her concrete information to bring to her doctor, turning a vague discomfort into a traceable trend. These small, quiet acts became part of her emotional wellness. They reminded Helen daily, nothing was too small to matter. In tuning into the tiniest cues, she began to rebuild a lifelong trust with her body. One page, one pause, one habit at a time. Let me know when you're ready for the next section. The third skin change: waxy, shiny skin on the legs or feet. 3. Waxy or shiny skin on the legs or feet. The habit of noticing transformed Helen more than she anticipated. What began as a journal entry about a strange itch turned into a deeper conversation with her body. Her nightly rituals became less about fixing and more about witnessing. She no longer approached her discomfort with frustration, but with a quiet respect. That shift didn't just help her manage her skin, it gave her back her sense of partnership with herself. With these practices firmly in place, Helen began noticing even subtler signs. Her awareness was sharper, her sense of self more grounded. Where once she might have dismissed a change, she now leaned in with curiosity. It was during one of her evening routines, feet propped on a pillow, applying lotion as the news hummed in the background, that she noticed it. Her skin looked different, not discolored, not inflamed, but smooth, almost glassy, shiny. She pressed gently. It wasn't dry, it wasn't tight, it just didn't look like her. There was a plastic-like sheen on the front of her shin that hadn't been there before. This new change wasn't painful, but it was new. And because Helen had learned to pay attention, not panic, she took the next step in decoding what this new texture could mean. Waxy, shiny skin on the lower legs is a change many notice but rarely question. It doesn't itch, it doesn't hurt, it simply appears. A smooth, almost taut surface that seems to reflect light differently, like the skin has been polished. For women over 65, this change is often dismissed as cosmetic or age-related, but beneath its quiet presence may lie a clue about blood flow, specifically reduced circulation due to peripheral artery disease (PAD). Helen didn't know the name for it at first. She only knew that her skin looked unfamiliar. It wasn't an aesthetic concern. It was the contrast. The rest of her leg looked normal, but the front of her shin had developed this unusual, almost waxy appearance that didn't match the rest of her skin tone or texture. This change became the beginning of another phase in her awareness. If the itch had taught her to listen, this smoothness taught her to look closer. It was through this lens of curiosity, not fear, that she explored new ways to care for herself. And these next habits weren't about skincare routines or treatments. They were about circulation, strength, and the quiet power of taking steps, literally and emotionally, toward understanding what her body was showing her. Helen's recognition of the waxy sheen didn't come with a gasp or a rush to the clinic. It came with a tilt of the head, a narrowing of the eyes, a pause in her routine. She lifted her foot into the light and studied it. no pain, no swelling, no bruises. But the skin gleamed in a way it hadn't before. She flipped through her body log and realized that in the weeks prior she had also noted some leg fatigue. It wasn't enough to stop her from moving, but she found herself hesitating at staircases and standing a little longer before sitting down. It was subtle and easy to rationalize as just a long day, but now paired with the skin change, the pattern became more apparent. What struck her most wasn't the symptom, it was her ability to notice it. That act of observation, of tracking, of reflecting, it gave her a sense of calm readiness. She made an appointment, shared her findings, and her doctor noted decreased blood flow in the lower limb, a mild sign of PAD. Helen didn't feel scared, she felt informed. The change in her skin wasn't a threat, it was an invitation to respond early, with care and curiosity, instead of urgency or alarm. Helen began checking her legs under natural light each morning, just for a minute. She wasn't scanning for problems, she was observing texture. The sheen was more visible near the ankle and shin, particularly in the mornings. She started documenting what she saw, making note of whether it faded after movement or stayed consistent. Instead of jumping into chores or errands, she added a new ritual: 10 minutes of gentle leg movement, ankle rolls, calf pumps, and short walks inside her hallway. These weren't exercises, they were circulation cues, movements designed not to exert, but to signal blood flow activation in her lower limbs. During her afternoon reading sessions, Helen adjusted her seating. Instead of keeping her feet on the floor, she propped them up with a firm pillow at heart level. This simple change made a subtle difference over time. Her legs felt lighter, and the sheen reduced slightly, especially after consistent practice. Helen added a new observation to her lotion routine. How did her skin feel under her hands? Was it waxy, cool? Did it give or stay taut? These notes, though quiet and small, gave her doctor better insight than a rushed clinical scan could. 4 tiny red or brown spots, petechiae. By now, Helen no longer saw her skin as something to merely cover in cream or shield from the sun. It had become a part of her dialogue with health. With the waxy sheen fading thanks to mindful movement and elevated rest, she felt steadier not only in her legs, but in her sense of self. These daily pauses to observe and record her body's responses helped her regain a quiet command of her well-being. With so much already achieved, Helen's confidence deepened. She no longer hesitated to trust what her body was telling her. This trust extended to how she talked with her doctor, how she prepared for her day, and how she greeted new changes. What might have once seemed too small to mention now felt worth acknowledging. This self-assurance proved vital when the next signal appeared. Barely visible at first, quiet like the others, but persistent. Tiny reddish-brown dots, scattered across her forearm. No bruising, no trauma. Just dots. Not raised, not itchy, just there. And again her body had something to say. Petechiae, small pinpoint spots, that appear reddish-brownish or purplish, are often brushed off as signs of aging, sun exposure, or thinning skin. But when these tiny marks show up without a clear cause, they may indicate a cardiovascular concern, including issues with blood vessel integrity, or even early signs of heart valve strain. Helen spotted them on a slow afternoon. She was sipping tea at the kitchen table when sunlight hit her arm just right. The spots weren't new bruises, and she hadn't bumped herself. Her sleeves were soft, no scratching, no inflammation, just a delicate spatter of dots she couldn't explain. Thanks to everything she'd already practiced, checking in, observing changes, documenting details, Helen didn't panic. She observed. She lifted her wrist and turned it under the light. Then she did what she had trained herself to do. She wrote it down. These spots became the center of her next phase, not because they alarmed her, but because they were different. And with everything she'd learned about her skin as a messenger, she knew different was worth attention. Helen's journal entries began noting these tiny changes with care. She marked when the dots appeared, where they clustered, and if they spread. They seemed to come and go, sometimes more pronounced after sitting for long periods, sometimes fading by morning. She brought this log to her doctor, who performed a few simple evaluations, eventually ordering blood work and a cardiac echo. The diagnosis wasn't dramatic, but it was validating mild valve regurgitation. The tiny capillaries in her arms had likely become fragile due to slight fluctuations in pressure. Not dangerous yet, but not meaningless either. What Helen gained was more than medical clarity. It was emotional affirmation. The decision to notice something so small had revealed something meaningful. That realization shifted her entire view of health. It wasn't about catching something big in time. It was about honoring the small clues, listening before symptoms spoke louder, and remembering that caring for her heart didn't just mean exercise or diet. It meant attention. Her body had been whispering, and she had become fluent in its language. Helen began observing her arms in natural morning light. Artificial lighting had masked the subtleties of color, but the sun revealed texture and hue changes. She took a few quiet moments after her tea to check her forearms and hands, not searching, just noticing. The practice was soft and simple, but revealing. She created a new section in her notebook labeled Skin Signals. Here she tracked the appearance of petechiae, with date, weather, activity level, and diet. Over time, she noticed they became more pronounced after salty meals, or long periods of inactivity. This helped her feel proactive, not passive. Without jumping into strenuous exercise, Helen added slow arm movements, wrist rolls, and light fingertip tapping throughout the day. These helped encourage upper body circulation and gave her moments of mindfulness that doubled as calming rituals. Instead of minimizing her findings, Helen brought them forward clearly at her next appointment. She used her notes, photos, and patterns to open a real conversation about her heart. The respect she showed her body extended into how she advocated for herself. By this point in her journey, Helen was no longer someone who merely noticed changes. She was someone who understood them. Each new habit she built had not only strengthened her physical awareness, but reshaped how she lived emotionally. Her relationship with her body evolved from distant maintenance to deep, attentive connection. The appearance of petechiae wasn't a crisis, it was a call to deepen her care. Through gentle routines and attentive tracking, Helen turned what could have been dismissed as a normal aging spot into a catalyst for cardiac insight. She proved to herself that age doesn't silence intuition, it sharpens it when listened to. The strength she'd gained wasn't loud, it showed up in her presence, her steadiness, and her trust in her own observations. She moved with the quiet conviction of someone who no longer questioned whether she was overreacting. She knew what she saw, she knew what she felt, and she knew how to respond with clarity, not fear. But there was still one more signal her body would show her, one final change that tied it all together. 5. Skin that heals slowly or develops ulcers. By now, Helen's journey had become a portrait of quiet transformation. What began with a single moment, a pause to examine the color of her toes, had expanded into a tapestry of habits that deepened her self-awareness and connection to her health. With each signal her skin shared, she responded not with fear, but with curiosity. That response brought clarity, strength, a renewed sense of agency. With these foundational habits in place, Helen had built more than routines, she had built trust. Her body was no longer something to be managed, it was something she could collaborate with. That shift made all the difference. But as her transformation neared its peak, the next signal would test everything she had learned. It didn't itch, it didn't sting, it didn't announce itself with new color. It stayed quiet, a small scrape from the garden, barely deeper than a paper cut, lingered for weeks. Then a patch on her ankle developed a scab, dark and slow to close. This was the final sign. The skin wasn't just irritated, it was struggling to heal, and it was time to understand what that meant. Among all the signals skin can offer, slow healing or unexplained ulcers are often the most serious and the most silent. For many seniors, a cut that lingers or a wound that won't close is written off as just taking longer these days. But when the skin consistently fails to repair itself, especially in the lower limbs, it may point to something deeper. insufficient blood flow, poor oxygen delivery, and in some cases, advancing cardiovascular dysfunction. These final points are more than indicators, they are the culmination of what the skin has been trying to say all along. Healing is a process that depends on circulation, immune strength, and internal regulation. When healing slows, it often reflects a broader slowdown of the systems supporting it. Helen didn't ignore the wound. By now she understood the patterns. She didn't fear the scab's delay. She watched it, she journaled it, she aligned it with her previous entries. And what she discovered in these final habits wasn't just another clue. It was the thread that tied everything together. A signal that all her inner systems were in conversation, asking her to pay attention one last time. It began with a small cut, a thorn from the rose bush catching Helen's ankle. She cleaned it, dressed it, and expected it to vanish in days. But it didn't. The scab thickened, then stayed. A week passed. Then two. She noticed it didn't hurt, but it didn't improve either. Her memory traced back to her partner, who had struggled with slow-healing wounds before his heart diagnosis. That memory nudged her toward mindfulness. She adjusted her socks to avoid friction. She checked the wound twice daily. She added photos to her journal, and noted small details: redness, moisture, warmth. When she mentioned it at her next appointment, her doctor took it seriously. A vascular scan showed mild ischemia, reduced blood flow to the lower limb. It wasn't an emergency, but it was a revelation. For Helen, this moment felt different from the others. Not because the symptom was scarier, but because it represented how far she had come. She didn't wait, she didn't minimize. She responded with the same calm, deliberate attention that had carried her through each step before. Helen started tracking the time between injury and healing. She noted how long bruises took to fade, how quickly scratches closed. This helped her detect deviations from her baseline. For example, if a paper cut that normally closed in 3 days lingered for 10, it told her something had changed, not catastrophically, but meaningfully. Understanding that wounds on the lower limbs are often the last to heal due to gravity and circulation, Helen added a 30-second evening check of her feet and ankles. Using a soft cloth, she cleaned the area, then examined it in good light. She noted skin tone, warmth, and any broken skin. These quiet moments were small acts of vigilance, rooted in respect, not anxiety. Although she didn't change her diet dramatically, Helen became mindful of hydration and protein intake, two factors known to support skin repair. She incorporated broth-based soups and increased her water with lemon slices. These were habits born not from fear, but from a growing understanding of what healing required, from the inside out. This final skin signal brought everything full circle for Helen. The wound on her ankle wasn't the beginning of decline, it was the final invitation to rise into deeper awareness. By recognizing that her body needed help to complete its healing process, she didn't feel weaker, she felt wiser. These final habits, observing the timeline, checking in quietly, nourishing herself mindfully, were simple yet profound. They reflected everything she had learned, that her body was not working against her, but always speaking for her. And that healing, emotional, physical, spiritual, didn't come from pushing harder, but from listening better. Helen's journey, shaped by quiet moments of reflection and small acts of care, became more than a checklist of symptoms. It became a living guide to what aging could look like when met with presence. And as she turned the final page in her journal, one thing was clear: this wasn't the end of her awareness. It was the foundation of a new way to live. The habits had taught her to notice, to trust, to respond, and now they would carry her forward. Helen didn't change everything overnight. She simply started listening. Her skin became a map, her habits the compass. You can do the same. Each quiet shift is a chance to reconnect, to heal, to thrive. Your body is speaking. Now is the time to hear it and honor it.